episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloney, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership for TEPSA. And each week, I try to bring you different guests who have inspired, encouraged, or challenged me in one way or another and have them tell some of their story. This whole series is based after my book, Stories from Web, with the idea that when you hear the stories of others, it helps you be brave enough to tell your own. I am thrilled this week to have my special guest, Kyle Wagner, on with me. Kyle, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are?
All right. Thanks, Todd, for having me on. Right now, I work with schools, forward-thinking schools, to create and grow 21st century learners. I'm based now in Hong Kong. My kind of history is with High Tech High, then starting some innovative programs over here in Asia, and now trying to help innovative leaders and teams to get those launched at their schools.
That's awesome. So now, obviously, you have not spent your entire life in Asia. So talk to me a little bit about how your path led you to being overseas.
Oh, gosh. Okay. I'll try to keep this the abridged version. I've always traveled overseas. I had a fascination with it. I mean, I was a history major back in college, and so culture has always fascinated me. And so every summer I traveled to a different place. This particular summer, I didn't really have the funding to do that as a teacher, struggling in my third or fourth year teaching. And so there's this program to teach English through music, arts, drama, games that was over in Shenzhen. And I said, hey, here's my way to get to Thailand. Shenzhen wasn't even on my map. And I'm like, China, I don't really know much about that, but it sounds like it might be fun. So that kind of launched the whole journey over in Asia. And here we are now, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years later, and I've spent 7 out of the last 8 years in Asia.
Wow. So, growing up, was education always something you wanted to be a part of?
Growing up, wait, say that again?
Was education always something that was on your radar?
Yeah, in one way or the other. I mean, I didn't look directly as education as being the career path. I'd always worked or tried to work with peers. I was a peer mediator in high school and liked to mitigate conflicts between friends. So I kind of had always had like a heart to work with people and teaching. So it wasn't directly on my career path when I started college, but it kind of just gravitated its way back there.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little about what your role is now and what you're doing.
So yeah, now, I mean, I figure probably like you, I'm trying to increase the most amount of bandwidth that I can have in really helping schools to make these big shifts that we know that are necessary. We talk a lot about 21st century skills. We talk a lot about STEAM or project-based learning. And schools are making those starts there, but there's really a lot of big transformations schools need to go through in terms of schedules, in terms of their curriculum, and sometimes trying to custom fit these new innovations in kind of these outdated systems is very hard to do, and you don't see that change last long. So I'm really working with schools to help to really change some of those systems and have the long lasting impact that they want on student learning.
Now, when you say working with schools, are you specifically meaning schools in Asia?
Primarily, yes. I mean, I work with a few schools overseas, and it's via online courses and coaching. But yeah, a lot of my work is with schools here in Hong Kong, in China. High Tech High, which is where I got my start. I just talked to some of my friends that still are back there and do the professional development. They say they literally have to turn teachers away and schools away because there's so many schools who want this kind of work. And so those are schools that are coming all the way from China to see what's happening at High Tech High, one of the leaders in this kind of innovation. So I feel like there's a really good market for it here, and there's a big need.
Mm-hmm. Now, growing up in a American school system and now working in a Asian school system and talking about innovation, do you see innovation viewed differently when you're working with the schools in Asia, or do you see it very similar to what's going on with innovation in America?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think they talk a little bit different language. I mean, there's a book about like men are from Mars, women from Venus. I don't know. I apologize if that's the wrong phrase. But I think kind of that's similar. That's similar to like the Eastern approach. The Eastern approach is like trying to scale innovation right away, and like whereas you're kind of getting your feet a little bit wet in it. I think in the States where we do, and now it's kind of taken off, and it's like, slowly drip feed. I think in the East, its approach is like, let's look at what the model is. How do we innovate? How do we be better innovators? And how do we be more creative? And then once we figure out the magic formula, we're going to scale this and build it for 10,000 kids. And we want you to help us do that in 2 months. So wow. It's a little different approach. So so I think the differences are they want to scale it and make it big right away, which I think is very ambitious. I think there's some setbacks from doing that. I think another difference is too the way schooling has been in the East. A lot of schooling in the East is, it's the teacher standing in front of the classroom and there's a lot of kids in their seats and there's a right answer, and you even raise your hand and hold your hand in a certain way to deliver what that answer is. And so it's a very more formal style of education. Right. So I think I feel like the States, in terms of certain innovations within education, I feel like 5-6 years ago, project-based learning was a thing. Now it's slowly turned to STEAM. Now it's design thinking. And I feel like Asia is like slowly catching up to those kind of trends. So it's kind of exciting being over here for that.
Now, you taught for a few years in the States and then you went to Asia. What did you think was one of the hardest learning curves for you as an educator with working with instructing kids in the States versus kids in the East now?
I think it's less to do, to be honest, with the kids and more to do with the teachers, because I work mainly now with the teachers. But I have definitely experienced teaching when I first came over to Asia, teaching kids. I would say it's hard for them to get over the obstacle that there's not a right answer. In that, there's room for them to share what their opinion is on something. I mean, as simple as a discussion, and we run these discussions where it would be a Socratic type of seminar and you're looking at a piece of text. Even then it's like, well, what does the teacher want me to answer? What is the right answer? So I think that's been one of the differences. But what I will say is that there's this level of professionalism that when they do ship or put something out to the world or put something out to an audience, they really, really want it to be great. And I think if they couple that with understanding that there's many different interpretations of what is great, it's definitely a force to reckon with.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, I know you've also written a book, so tell me about that.
Yeah, so the book's Power of Simple. Again, it's another way to me in terms of like, how can I impact the most amount of change with schools that are really trying to head this direction, but just need a bit of a toolkit to get started. And so that was just a little bit about my journey in helping develop the Futures Academy, which is a school within a school in a large international school. Because quite frankly, large international schools have no excuse not to be the biggest innovators because they don't exactly have the same limitations in terms of curriculum. A lot of times in funding, they have lots of funding. But again, they still find that they face the same hurdles that they would if they had those limitations. And so it's kind of like, here are 5 simple ways in which you can move your school forward. And I think that could be replicated in places across the world that fits their kind of community needs.
So growing up, did you ever think you would have a book out?
No. I mean, my mom actually is now inspired to write a book herself. And actually, I'm a quadruplet, which I don't know how this is going to work its way into this interview, but I like that it is. And so she's just writing this book now about like raising quadruplets. And I'm sharing this story because I think everybody, and I think you would agree, I mean, it's tell your story, right? I think everybody has a story. And I think when we think of books, we think of this like this giant, like work that takes, years and years to produce. But really, a great book is just a story, that other people can relate to. And so I didn't necessarily see myself growing up as writing a book, but once I got over the obstacle of seeing a book less as like, a collection of years of research and more just your story, then it became doable to do.
I love the way you described that. I mean, that's such a perfect representation of when you look at it as not so overwhelming and it is just a collection of stories because that's the way we connect. I think that's a brilliant way to talk about that process. So I love that you mentioned your quadruplet. So, I've never had a guest that has been that. So tell me a little bit about what was that like growing up with several other siblings where you're all the same age and how that was different for you.
It's funny because it says like I thought about like having a T-shirt that says like I am a quadruple in the front, and like here are the questions you may ask. And one is like, how is it different? And I'm like, I was literally only not a quadruplet for 1 minute of my life when I was a triplet, like as we were getting pulled out. So I can't speak much to like the differences, but I will say now, like growing up and look back on it and talking to people who were not raised quadruplet, I mean, some of the differences, you always have a 2-on-2 basketball team. You know, that's one of the differences and something that's great. You always have someone to talk to. Like, whereas, especially when you're a teenager and you're like kind of like angry at the world, you have other people who are angry at the world with you, you know? So that's kind of
your poor mother.
And that's what everyone says, your poor mother. I finally understand that, like that phrase, your poor mother. It took me a while to understand it, but now looking back on it and seeing my mom with her granddaughters, because my brothers all have girls, which is crazy. 5 girls, you know, 4 boys gave birth to 5 girls. She is now like totally normalized, and I think she finally, like, I realized raising 4 boys is definitely a handful.
So not only quadruplets, but you were all 4 boys.
Yeah, all 4 boys. So, but the thing is, they thought they were going to be 3 because I guess the sonograms. I don't know. My parents tell me a story maybe because it adds to like the appeal of the story, but they only saw 3. And then, you know, the doctor's pulling, like reaching down and is like, wait, I think there's another one. And I mean, I think it was just so shocking for my parents at the time that it was just like, all right, well, bring it on. And of course, you know, that was the 4th boy that they reached for. So 2 identical and 2 fraternal.
So are you one of the identical or fraternal?
No, I tell people I got my own egg. I'm a fraternal.
You know, that's so interesting to me. I've never even thought about how when you have quadruplets or even more, that some of them can be identical and some fraternal.
Yeah,
so
you
had both.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one, I guess, I mean, again, I'm a history major, so I know a little bit of the science behind it. But yeah, one particular egg, you know, you basically share that egg, and then when that splits, that's the identical twins. At this certain, you know, stage of fetal development, and then there's, you know, the 2 other eggs. So basically, yeah, 3 eggs got fertilized.
So, does this run in your family?
No, it doesn't run in my family. And
really?
Yeah, so it's a pretty unique experience. My parents are quite, you know, religious and spiritual, so they say like, careful. They always tell people, careful what you pray for. You might get it.
That's hilarious. And do y'all all have similar names? I know some families, when they have twins or triplets or anything, they name them some kind of way. Do y'all have anything like that?
Well, they threw out any, mini, miny, mo, and then they threw out like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, which I actually would love to have Luke as over like Miney. That would be a much better name. But no, our names aren't necessarily related to any kind of pattern.
Okay. Now, you know, growing up with siblings, obviously a lot of people that have siblings, they're at different ages and they connect in different ways. Growing up, you know, all the same age, are you still close to all of your brothers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we have a special bond. I really find that my identical brothers have even more of a special bond, I think, than, you know, the other siblings in our family. But, you know, when we all get together, it's just like, I mean, I've been away for half a year or a year, and I'll go back and it'll just be, you know, like old times. And I think one of the hallmarks of like our family is like, if you go into the room, you might have to wait like 15 minutes to even like say, like get a word in, because it's just a bunch of people talking, probably like most families.
Well, and now there's grandkids in the mix too. I'm sure there's even more.
Yeah. Now it's like is watching the grandkids and watching. I mean, you basically have as much like Advil on hand as possible.
That's right. You know, now living overseas, is that difficult for you, being away from family like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first it was quite difficult. You
Right.
get over. I think when you've traveled, and anybody can relate to this, you know, who's traveled, is there's a difference between traveling to a place and living there. When you're living there, I mean, you're fully immersed in the culture, and especially China was quite a culture shock. So once I got over the initial appeal of, you know, excitement of being in a different place, I did have a hard time really, you know, being that far away from my family in a new culture that's very different from the culture we're from, a different language that I was just starting to get a grip with. So yeah, I think it gets easier. So anybody who's considering traveling or moving abroad, I would say do it. Definitely have a close support system nearby, and a community that you can connect to right away. But yeah, wouldn't change it going back.
So, you mentioned, trying to learn some of the language. Now, living there several years now, have you learned some more of the language?
So yeah, it's a good question. I'm in Hong Kong now, which mainly is Cantonese, and I won't speak too much about, the conflict. I'm sure everyone's seen it worldwide, but between Hong Kong and China. So speaking or learning Mandarin doesn't benefit you as much here in Hong Kong. But with that said, a lot of my work centers and going back and forth to China. So I'm in a conversational level now. I'm going to classes here in Hong Kong for Mandarin. So I'm at a conversational level. But if anybody who speaks Chinese is listening to this, I don't even want to.
Right.
Just
I understand.
It might be impressive, but to them, they'd be like, no, phones are off.
That's the thing with me. It's like I can have a conversation in Spanish a little bit, but don't ask me to do something on camera because I'm going to look like a complete idiot trying to speak Spanish. Well, I want to ask a little bit too. Thinking about your life growing up and kind of leading to where you are now, what do you think is something that was really a defining moment that helped make you into the man you are today?
Oh gosh. There's literally so many. And I mentioned about being a quadruple. I think that's huge. I think going through an identity crisis, especially as a quadruplet, shaped me because, it sounds funny to people looking back on because they're like, that's so cool. That's amazing. You're a quadruplet. Like that should be your number one thing that you share. And for me, it was, especially growing up as a kid, it was hard to have my own definitive, like who I am. I was always Wagner or, quadruple number 3, or my favorite, like fourth of a brain, so this is comical, to people at the time, but it really affected me. And I felt like almost I moved halfway across the world to like establish who I am apart from that kind of identity. So
do you still find yourself struggling with that sometimes?
Sure. I think always. I think, being a quadruplet, and even though we're all born at the same time, I was, third out. So I'm kind of like in the middle there. And I think, for people who aren't a quadruplet, maybe you can relate to if they're like kind of that middle child. So it's, like, hey, look over here, look over here. So I think that I think when certain things come up, and certain like doubts of myself, or doubts of what I'm doing, or when people are, for some reason, it's my own projection when I'm like, oh, they're not accepting, I'm different, I have my own thing, and trying to assert yourself, I think over assert yourself as having your own thing, probably because of you've been doing that your whole life. Yeah, so it resurfaces.
Well, I think you brought up a great point is when I talk to a lot of people and they hear from or see other successful people, they have this immediate assumption that people that have done successful things are extremely self-secure and they don't have those doubts and they don't have this, they've worked through all that, which is hardly ever the case at all. And so thinking about yourself, when those doubts begin to creep in on you and you start to lose sight of things that that are true about yourself, but you're allowing those beliefs to come back in, how do you remain focused and keep in the forefront of that who you really are?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I'm sure everybody who's experienced a little bit of success, I think, will relate. It's basically a daily decision. It's not something like you probably relate to this too. There are like weeks, there are days where you like just have it and you feel super confident. And, it's like the secret. You're like, I realized the secret. And then, the next week you're like, what am I doing with my life? Like, you're like, wait, last week I had the secret and now I don't know what I'm doing. I think it's daily. You have to have routines, I think, to get you in that mindset of like, I can do this. I'm dedicated. I'm focused. And so like I have like right here, this is my little journal that I keep handy. And to me, that is it. Like I try to do a meditation each day. And the meditation really helps me to slow down. And then also I've started this gratitude thing where I'm just writing something I'm grateful for each day. I saw this on like a Twitter chat somewhere, and I'm just sticking something in there. But when I start my days with that 15 or 30 minutes, I just feel like I'm going out into the world a much more confident, self-secured, assured person.
You know, I loved what you said there, because that is so true about it being a daily choice. And, you know, you worded that in a way that I haven't really thought about, but I think is exactly right too, about how, you know, when you do things, it's like there are days and weeks where you're like, this, man, I was meant for this. I'm killing it. And then it's like the next day you're like, nope, I should quit everything because I'm the worst person ever at this. And so I love that you kind of brought that up and shared that, because I think that's so genuine and real, and lets people see that, you know, we all struggle with that. You know, I attended a John Maxwell certification training this last week, and one of the presenters said something that really stuck with me. It was two sisters who have started a really successful company together, and they said, you know, we call each other every day, and yes, we could spend the whole phone conversation complaining about this or that or this or that. She goes, but that just brings things down. And she said, so every day when we call each other and we talk, we always ask each other to share one love from the day and one learn from the day. So that way neither one of those are viewed as a negative thing, but it's like, what was one thing that you loved about the day today, and was one thing you learned either about yourself that you will or won't do again. And I really thought about that and reflected on how many times in my own day, in my own life, I'm like, well, that screwed the whole day up, or this is that. And I'm just complaining and complaining. It's like, well, if I really just focus on what's one thing I love today, what's one thing I learned today, and then just move on from that. And you know what? Tomorrow's going to start again. It really helped reframe a lot of focus for me in what I was choosing to put my attention in.
So have you done that now? The love and the learn. Have you implemented that and you start doing that as well?
I have. I've started it for like the last week, and I haven't told my friends about that. And so there's been several of them that I've been texting, and they were like, oh, it was such a rough day. And I was like, oh, well, tell me one thing you loved about the day and one thing you learned from the day, just to kind of like start pulling that out of them. And it's been interesting to see how quickly the conversation will turn from it was a terrible day to, okay, well, let me stop and think. Yeah, this was really a good part of the day today, and I really learned something through this. And then we dive into that conversation, and it takes it away from being this huge complain negative train, where it's not that you can't vent. It's not what the idea is, but it's that like that shouldn't be everything about your day.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you've actually pose that kind of same question to your friends too, because I think I'm going to use that.
Do it. Well, and I didn't tell them why I was doing it, because I was like, I don't want them to see I'm like testing this theory on them to see how it works.
Yeah, once the interview comes out, they're like, I get it.
Exactly. They're like, I know what you were doing now. Don't ask me that again. Well, Kyle, one question that I always love to end all my interviews on is, if there's one thing that you wish more people knew or understood, what would your one thing be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I almost want to relate it to what we just shared about the grind. But I kind of want to relate it more to kind of my mission in helping schools. And I think the one thing I wish more people knew is that success, and I want to relate it to in school too, because I think there might be some leaders of schools who watch your program, being a principal, think that, you don't start until you have the whole chart, the whole route mapped out, exactly where you're going. You have a 5-year perfect strategic plan. Everybody knows about it. And, step A is to lead to B and then to lead to C. I think I wish they knew within schools is that like you get that as you go, and that innovation especially is not all charted out, but you really, once you start the journey and once you start just tweaking a couple of things, whether it's your schedule, whether it's 1 week off the timetable, whether it's pairing a couple teachers together to do a cool project, whether it's going out in the community for one day and doing a map of the community, and seeing who the kids can connect to, that will just propel so many other opportunities for you. So I think that's the one thing, is just ship, even before the whole route.
I love that. I think that's the perfect way to wrap this up and end that. So, Kyle, I was thrilled when, even despite time zones, you were able to try to make this work for me. So, thank you so much for giving me some time today.
Yeah, thank you so much as well, Todd.
And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out this episode and all the other ones before it on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you want to check it out. It's there. I hope you leave me a review as well on iTunes, as that helps with things. And remember to check out my book, Stories from Web, where you can hear countless other stories of people and things that they're doing. I hope this story shared tonight has encouraged you to get out there and be brave enough to tell some of yours, because like I tell you every week, every story matters. Have a great night, everyone.